you very much for coming back on.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by Betfair Australia. No matter where you are in the world, if you're looking to find your edge in sports betting or racing, you'll need to visit the Betfair Hub. From analysis to betting psychology, it has everything that you need. Simply visit betfair.com.au/hub.
Today I'm joined by Marco Blume. Marco, thank you very much for coming back on.
Hey Jay, it's been a while. I'm glad to be back on.
Yeah, it has. Since we last spoke, things have evolved and changed, obviously, and we won't backtrack over what we covered last time. Everyone can go back and listen to that when they get a chance. I want to sort of jump straight in, and one thing I've heard you talk about recently is your models, and in those models continuing to tighten over the last decade or even longer, since Pinnacle's obviously been a dominant player in the sports betting market. Just might be a dumb basic question, but just generally, why do you build your models, and essentially why do you need them?
Well, it's part of our business model, right? Our business model is to manage risk. Most betting companies manage their clients by stake factoring them, which means reducing their limits. We actually are in the business of managing liability and are very dependent on having good models to do this. Without good models, we would be victim to all these smart customers with their good models. So we need to fight fire with fire.
So I was talking to someone about this recently, and we were trying to come up with an analogy, probably a bad or a loose analogy. But if you think about the 100-meter sprint, the world record times for that, or even the 400-meter sprint, those times continue to get lower and lower. And people will say, well, it's at a point now where you can only shave tenths of seconds off or hundreds of seconds off. For your models, is it something similar if we try and conceptualize it?
Oh, for sure. I mean, the times of ginormous gains are obviously over, right? We are in a sophisticated world, but yeah, I mean, that being said, if all these small differences do add up over time. So if we wouldn't be improving our models, if we would just be happy with a model and then don't look at it for a few years, I'm sure the sophisticated crowd that is the customers of Pinnacle would dance around us and would parade us through the ring.
Are there times where there's overcorrections or things are factored in too much and it sort of goes too far? Just like in the 100-meter sprint or the 400-meter sprint, there are seasons where the world record is obviously not broken or times aren't as strong. Is that the case as well with some of the models?
Yes. I mean, models are very complicated. People think about models maybe a little bit too linear. Models are multi-variable monstrosities, black boxes, and sometimes you turn too many knobs at the same time, and then you actually don't even know exactly why you did something, and what the outcome is. It's a rather complicated world to fine-tune models. Models at this stage are not simple Excel sheets anymore, where you update a cell and then some other cells update. These are complete machine learning AI-based models, and often black box. You don't even exactly know what's going on underneath the hood.
Is it the same for each sport? Like you said, now, like we're at a point where we're just shaving tiny bits off the model. Is that the case for all of the different sports, or is there a learning curve or a steep learning curve even for some of the newer sports or some of the sports that are getting more attention and action when it comes to sports betting?
Well, I mean, of course, our models for the established sports are more sophisticated than models for exotic sports. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean? You focus your energy on where the turnover is, and the turnover is in the established sport, and that's what we're working on the longest and where we put the most modeling work into.
And what about things like the World Cup, where you may not have a lot of historical data of those teams as the lineups suggest over longer periods? Is that more of a different approach, or is it somewhat similar and you just use other factors more so than things like historical data?
No, the World Cup is pretty rough in a way since you don't have any reference points, right? So the first games of the World Cup, you see the lines move quite a lot because there's a lot of uncertainty about what the correct line is, and at the very end of the World Cup, you finally reach the points where you understood the relative team strengths, but then the World Cup is over. So you don't have the luxury of domestic leagues where you can watch the season develop and then eventually you have a good understanding about the relative strengths and weaknesses of the clubs.
That might be one of the unique ones where often the more efficient the market, the higher the limits. But in the World Cup, certainly the World Cup final and those later games, they're very, very high limits, albeit the lines may not be as efficient given some of the other factors at play.
Yeah, I mean that's the advantage of being the only game in town and the entire world being focused on it. So the turnover is very, very high. So you have to accommodate it with high limits. There's just no way you could deal a Super Bowl or World Cup at low limits, right? I mean, this is where people like to gamble high, and you got to accommodate as a bookmaker. You know, that's the reality. You can't be tight in the World Cup. You know, World Cup, your customers want to bet, so let them gamble. You know.
So what would it take then? And this is obviously a tricky question to answer specifically, but just generally, if you can, what would take it for the line to move in the World Cup final or a semi-final compared to something like the NBA Finals Game 7, where everything is pretty much known and factored in, whereas throughout the World Cup, it may not be as simple or as easy as that?
You're talking about when the line is established. So, I mean, the answer is always the same. And I've been asked this question in the past a few times. What moves lines? Money moves lines. It's as simple as this. Nothing else moves lines. Money moves lines.
Take us through your thought process when you heard about Mayweather and McGregor coming up, and obviously, you know, along the lines of more of a unique event. What was the thought process going in?
I mean, I didn't think that it would generate nearly as much interest as it did. But once it became clear that it was a huge spectacle, you know, like my personal opinion was that McGregor has no chance. You know, but you know, no chance is quote unquote. You have to put it into some form of a percentage. Is he an 80% underdog, 90% underdog, and so. You know, it was interesting. But then with a fight like this, you have no idea really. I mean, you're just guessing, you know, as much as anybody else. I mean, what kind of, you know, proprietary information do we have about Mayweather with McGregor? So these to me are really raw events that I actually quite enjoy because they are really raw gambling at the best and raw betting at the best. You know, somebody's opinion against our opinion, and let's see who's right at the end.
Do those present opportunities for you to maybe construct your lines a little bit differently when you think you might be, because obviously there's an established marketplace among other operators and what can be possible, and we saw, you know, almost all of the, let's just call it professional community, say this is a once in a lifetime opportunity and the ability to make money on this event betting Mayweather. Do you have a similar mindset? I know you've said in the past you're more of a gambling bookmaker as opposed to managing risk. Was this an opportunity where you could construct things to your advantage?
Interesting event. I mean, we did gamble relatively high on the event since you know, most of us favored the boxing ex-world champion over the MMA fighter. But you can only gamble so much in a fight like this. You know, I mean, how much are you actually willing to stand up to other people's strong opinion that gets expressed and them betting a lot of money? So you have to be mindful that you're not getting caught up in your own mind and in the echo chamber that might exist in your company.
I wanted to ask about price manipulation, and I don't know that it's the right word. It has a negative connotation to it, but is it something you think about or your traders think about, and is it something you can detect, or is it always hindsight where you can tell that someone might have been betting earlier on to move a line potentially, knowing they have the ability to do that, and then later on betting more substantially on the other side?
Well, line manipulation is a huge topic for us, and it's something that we have a lot of tools in place to monitor for and do a lot of analytics about. Line manipulation is you know, per definition means that you're placing wagers in bad faith to move the line a certain way to then take advantage of the line being, you know, further away from the true probability. How you take advantage of it is varies, right? There's many ways how people take advantage of line manipulation, and some are very hurtful to us, and some are invisible to us. So the other thing is, you know, line manipulation doesn't really work in a world where your models generally assume that the line is correctly priced at any given moment in time. So you have to be very, very, very sensitive to line manipulation, and you need to pay a lot of attention, a lot of training, and actually we have several models who deal specifically with line manipulation that run on top of this to detect it. It's a huge topic for us, for sure.
Do you see it as generally sinister, or do you think it's just part of the game, and if your models are correct and accurate, like you mentioned, then it's something that you can consume?
Sinister is, you know, this is not an ethical or moral decision to me. I mean, I don't condone it. We will do everything to stop it, but I also understand that this is somewhat part of the game, sadly. People will do whatever they can to make money, right? And if this is an avenue for them to generate revenue, I'm sure they will try their best to get there.
How prevalent is it? Is it every day you're discussing it? Every week? Every month?
Every day. Every day. I mean, you have to understand how many lines we offer in any given day, right? So, I mean, there's always line manipulation going on somewhere. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but line manipulation is a huge topic.
Do you think you're getting better at dealing with it, or is it still in its earlier stages?
I think we're quite good at it. To be quite frank, else we wouldn't be surviving. But that doesn't mean we couldn't. We can be relaxed upon it. People can always come up with new tricks and new schemes to do line manipulation.
Do you have the luxury of moving towards fully automated trading? Obviously, there's parts of the process that are automated and a lot of technology involved. But do you think that's something with your business model, your structure, that you can head towards, or is it always the human element that's going to be critical?
It's always going to be a mix. Fully automation is not desirable in my mind. The humans do add very critical elements to any automation. However, you also don't want to be in a fully manual way because humans tend to make mistakes. Humans get tired. Humans get cranky. While the machine is doing a much better job at most menial tasks.
We spoke about bots last time. Have you? Funnier question. Have you ever seen bots going wrong, and maybe you can tell that something is at play that shouldn't be?
Yes, I've seen bots go astray. Just like the stories about financial market bots going astray. I've seen betting bots go astray. It's quite funny when that happens. I have to say, like the German word of Schadenfreude comes to my mind there.
How are you supposed to handle it as an operator?
I mean, it depends. Like it's sometimes really hard to handle. I mean, sometimes we shut the accounts down. I mean, it doesn't happen that often. People are very careful with their bots. I mean, everybody who ever writes a bot that can place wagers will be very careful to put some safeguards in so that if there's a bug in the programming, it doesn't wipe out the bankroll.
Yeah. No, there's some legal cases on this topic which are quite interesting a number of years ago now, but I think as we progress through the 2020s, let's call it, it's going to be an interesting area where it does increase and maybe even more off-the-shelf tools are available. There's going to be more malfunctions and breakdowns, and it could be an interesting one to come.
Yeah, for sure.
So do you see a future where, obviously bots is one way where it's not necessarily manually human bet placement. Do you think there's going to be a future where you will accept bets through other mediums? And I know you kind of do in certain ways, but through things like Amazon or Facebook or through your television with your remote in hand, do you think you'll ever accept those types of things?
Yeah, I don't want to say never, but I don't think it's in the cards right now to do this.
Pre-game traders versus your live traders, are they the same person, same people? Are they different skill sets? How do you assess what's required for either of those?
No, it's the same pool of people. I mean, yeah, we have people who specialize on live, and we have people who specialize on pre, but it's nothing that predestines somebody to be on either side of the decision. It's just some people like to watch games more than others, so naturally they probably are more into the live game aspect of it, but there's nothing that separates these kind of groups. The work is very similar as well. You have to understand the betting patterns. You have to understand the ebb and flow of a game. You have to understand the customers. You have to understand the teams, the league, and so on. I mean, nothing really changes,
What about on finding the traders? How do you may not find and hire everyone, but your team and how you approach it generally, are you trying to find someone and training them intensively, or are you trying to find them pre-trained with certain tricks and techniques already in their toolkit, or how do you go about doing it?
I usually prefer people who are not trained, and so that we can actually train them in the way that we do it. Other companies do things slightly differently than us, so it's often easier if they start from scratch. That being said, if someone is very experienced, it's also not that hard for them to learn a few new tricks. So it's probably the most dangerous if you have half knowledge and are less willing to change your way. Those are the people that I try to avoid.
And are there limitless people out there that you would be willing to bring on, or is it a very small pool that you're working within?
a lot of smart people out there, and we're always interested in hiring smart people for sure.
So I want to talk a bit more we talked about World Cup before, and you talked a bit about the efficiency. Are you willing to risk more in those types of events, or do you just want to get out of there alive and unscathed to a certain extent?
You have to risk more. I mean, that's just the reality. I mean, you just have to gamble a little bit higher in the World Cup. Then, you have very high limits, right? If you're trading, like, what are we trading off? Like $500,000 limits. Like you gotta, if some customers decide to bet Team A over Team B, you can easily be exposed for a few millions very, very quickly. And sometimes it's not great to trade out of it. So you just have to. You have to gamble higher in the World Cup than you gamble on another game. Limits are always a good indicator about how much you can actually gamble. I have to gamble, right? If you trade a league for $200, you won't have that much exposure. But if you trade a league for 500,000, sometimes in the World Cup we do $1 million limits. Obviously we're going to get exposed.
We talked about some of the bigger sports last time we spoke. I'm interested in the smaller sports. I think we focused a bit on esports as well, but in terms of prioritizing them, what goes into that? Because obviously before esports was a priority for Pinnacle, it wasn't. So what trips something up to be able to become something you're very much focusing on?
It's a cycle between a circle. Sorry, you start offering it, you get turnover. You're offering more, you get more turnover, and then eventually you have a full-fledged sport like esports, and you have great turnover, great interest of customers, and so it becomes a major focus of it. In other sports, for some reason your clients might not like your product. They don't enjoy if you offer them water polo. No one cares about it, so you never really expand the product and focus on it because you think there might not be the potential payoff at the end of the work.
And do you, when you add new sports or different leagues, for example, is it usual that you would have them taken down at a certain point, or is it uncommon? They usually find a way to subsist, even if there is very much low turnover and low interest?
We don't give up immediately, but sometimes after 6 months, 12 months, we might just decide after a review to say, the turnover has never really increased. It's only a handful of customers that betting this instead of a vast amount of, like several customers, new customers. So a lot of factors come into this, but sometimes we have to give up, for sure.
And is it always worth it from a commercial perspective on those smaller sports and events? Obviously, the turnover is lower. The return, in money figures is obviously lower. Maybe the margin is very different. But is it always something you're willing to do in terms of spending your time on?
Well, we're trying to appease our customers, right? I mean, our customers have demands on us, and so we're trying to offer whatever we can. But if then you offer a sport and only 1-2 customers, who are very, very proficient in the sport, take advantage of your weak lines, of your lack of models, the sport becomes a liability. So you have to make a decision eventually.
And the trajectory, is it always very similar in terms of as turnover goes up, margin will probably go down, and generally ROI will change in that sort of balance?
Yeah, it's always the same trajectory for sure.
Are there any new sports on those lists that you're focusing on more? Or are
they
pretty much the same?
No, pretty much the same. I mean, esports now obviously is the biggest focus. Given the lack of any other product out there right now. So but the entire world of sports betting is now an esports world.
Yeah, it's getting strange. Do you have a sense of what will happen once we come back to normal with sports resuming? Do you think it'll be as it was previously, or I think there will be a shift in the landscape?
I think one thing that will change in the future is that almost every single bookmaker has esports after COVID-19 is over. If you're a bookmaker right now, you must offer esports. Else you don't have a product.
And what about financial crisis, economic crisis on sports betting operators? I don't know what the impact was with 2008, but thinking through now, do you think it'll be something that is very detrimental, or is it one of those things where people will still bet, they'll still drink, they'll still smoke throughout even economic and financial crisis?
Well, that part I think is true. I don't think that's going to change. However, the question is, the difference between 2008 and right now is 2008 sports were still playing. Right now we don't have any sports playing, so many of the operators are getting hurt right now.
Yeah, it could be even on the operator side a different landscape. Obviously, we're seeing Flutter and the Stars Group coming together. Obviously, Bet365 is always at top of those lists Do you think having those massive companies who are taking up large market share, and obviously they're very different to your business model and different operations altogether, but is that better for you? Does it make no difference given you work in a whole different sphere?
I mean, it doesn't really affect us, to be quite honest, but I think it's very dangerous for other small bookmakers who operate in the same business space as these giant companies do.
No, I think it's one of those things where as they go through regulatory approval, it's going to be interesting to see what type of scrutiny exists, and ultimately what happens. We're seeing even in the US states sometimes with early indications that it's going to be 1, 2, maybe 3 different bookmakers that take up the vast majority of shares. So
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's going to subsist throughout the different territories.
Yep.
What do you think you would be doing if you weren't at Pinnacle? I don't know if I asked you this last time, but I think it's probably a question you get all the time.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I really like sports betting. I enjoy this space, so I'm not so sure what I would do if I wouldn't be working at Pinnacle. I haven't really made up my mind on that.
What are the new topics and issues you got to deal with? I mean, we talked about line manipulation before. I'm sure there's a few others. I know there was a ghost match more recently. There's probably some things that have been going on for a while, but anything new on the agenda for 2020 and beyond that's not necessarily talked about?
No, I mean, if you ask me what I'm focusing on, I mean, mostly like we have launched a B2B product, and this is one what I've been working on. I'm very dedicated to get a proper B2B product in the world, so that other bookmakers can benefit from Pinnacle's risk management abilities.
So how would that work? Would that be for existing operators that may want to take sports that they don't have, or at least augment what they currently have?
Yeah, that's how it would work exactly. You can basically outsource your trading to Pinnacle, and let us, presumably the experts, handle your risk more efficiently than what you do right now.
What type of customer experience will that have for someone that may not use Pinnacle now or doesn't have access right now, but will eventually through this type of situation?
I'm not so sure, because the customer experience is still defined by the operator, not really by us, right? We're supplying the product. We're just trying to. I mean, the operator now has the choice of maybe allowing a little different clientele be betting with them. So there might be some options that the operator didn't have before.
It seems contrary to the typical model of many sports books. Have you had those conversations about how they're going to balance what they're currently doing with a B2B solution like this that might adjust how they've typically thought about risk or liabilities and things like that?
I think we haven't fully explored the space yet, but I think there's opportunities that some of these bookmakers realize exist in a world where we can take on customers a little bit differently than they have before. So but I don't think we've fully explored the space yet.
Have you been keeping half of one eye on the US market at all?
Yeah, a quarter of an eye at most. The US market is shaping up nicely, but it's still going slowly in some ways in my mind.
Yeah, it's going to take some time to evolve. I don't think the current pandemic situation will help, or at least accelerate things. But what do you see for the future? Just thinking generally about the US, as we get more sports books, more betting action through these licensed operators, what impact will that have on US sports?
It's going to be great. I mean, many new clients, more turnover in the US, but I think overall it's nothing but positive that the US is opening up. Nothing but positive that I can think of.
Do you think it'll have any negative impacts with people allocating more of their time and efforts and resources into the US and new markets, or do you think it'll be pretty much fine for the existing operations?
It's going to be fine. It's just more clients are allowed to gamble legally again in the States, which is great.
Yeah, it's been an interesting couple of years already, so it's going to be even more strange and bizarre or excellent moving forward. So we'll see how it evolves. Sorry. What do you do in this time when you've obviously got some time to plan, I'm guessing, or at least look forward throughout the rest of 2020? What happens if all sports come back at the same time? Are you able to deal with that, or what's the thought process behind having multiple sports coming back all at once?
I mean that would be a dream scenario. I mean, obviously we are ready to trade. I mean, we have been trading before COVID, so we are ready to trade after COVID. Right now I'm actually more busy than pre-COVID, because you really got to make sure that everything is as tight as possible. That you offer the most product that you can. So we're offering more product than we have ever offered, more niche markets. So, and those niche markets have associated problems with them. So right now is a very busy time for myself, actually.
Is it positive for esports, do you think? I know we touched on it already, but just in terms of all the different things going on in the world right now, and then esports being propelled forward, is that ultimately going to be good?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is, if this is what it maybe this is what it needed to take to cement esports even further in people's mind. That esports is really like a big thing and won't go away.
Yeah, no doubt. I think everyone's locked inside. They got to figure out what to do with their time, and esports may not be the worst use of everyone's time.
Correct.
So, just a couple of general questions on the betting side, if you don't mind. Just from your perspective, I know you're on the operator side, but just from a professional gambler or someone looking at that space, let's just say Premier League, for example. From your viewpoint, what's a realistic ROI for those looking at Premier League? And obviously it varies by a number of different factors, but just given those markets and how they are at the moment, if we see Premier League coming back next few seasons, what should someone be aiming for?
I have no idea. Hopefully, you aim to make some money. If it's 2%, 3%, 1%, and anything is good in my book. It's not an easy sport to beat. But if you do your research, if good luck. I mean, the limits are high.
Does it, on the flip side of the smaller niche markets, can that ROI jump pretty high, or is it something that it can?
It can. I mean, some of these markets are very, very inefficient. Some of these markets have very generic odds. And if you do your research, you find edges. And you might be able to exploit these edges for quite a long time.
Yeah, I think the one thing with this break period of time without the major sports, it'll be interesting to see what impact that has on the overall betting markets if things shift back to normal pretty quickly with the focus on those major events, or if it's going to change. But I think the other question that often comes up from the betting side is your trading team and your group that you work with. What are some of the topics they're thinking about at the moment? Whether it's books they're reading, publications, how are they allocating their time when they may not be full-time trading?
Everybody's watching esports right now. That's what it is. Everybody who has never traded esports before is now becoming an esports trader.
There you go. I guess you got to cross over and expand your portfolio.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. Like some of them very experienced traders, going to trying esports now for the first time, and actually, some of them even like it.
Well, Marco, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you coming back on the podcast. For those that haven't listened to the first go round, they should definitely go back, even though it's been a couple of years. But as always, appreciate your time and thanks for coming on the show.
All right, thank you, Jake, and stay safe, everybody.